Welcome to the inaugural broadcast of the Aging with Options show. Thank you for joining us. I'm Chris McCutcheon. I'm thrilled to introduce you to topics of interest to seniors, as well as those who care for our seniors in the Louisville area. Now, the first set of baby boomers turned 65 this past January 1st. So since then, more than 10,000 baby boomers turned 65 every single day. That trend will continue to happen daily for the next 19 years. So our goal with the Aging for Options radio program is to provide interesting, relevant contents of topics such as health, senior living, long-term care, aging in place, local events, products, services, a variety of other topics facing today's seniors and their loved ones. So thank you for joining us for this exciting venture to kick off the very first Aging with Options show. I'm delighted to have with us in the studio our first guest, Dr. Keith Knapp. Keith, thank you for joining us.
Well, it's an honor to be here for the first show.
I appreciate that. Keith is the president and CEO of Christian Care Communities. Christian Care Communities is Kentucky's largest faith-based provider of affordable senior housing and long-term care services. A little bit about Keith. Keith has a bachelor's degree from University of Kentucky, master's degree in healthcare administration from Xavier University, and a PhD in gerontology from the University of Kentucky. Keith is an assistant clinical professor at U of L's Department of Family and Geriatric Medicine, and he's also been a licensed nursing home administrator for 31 years. So, Keith, you've been involved in the field and study of geriatrics for quite a long time. What got you interested in this area?
Well, you know, like a lot of folks that wandered into our profession, I started out doing something entirely different and discovered this and was sort of drawn to it. I took a job as an orderly in a nursing home while I was in graduate school studying to be a hospital administrator.
Is that right?
And it was considered a pretty upscale nursing home at the time. This is in the late 70s.
Uh-huh.
And yet I saw lots of opportunity as my career unfolded, looking ahead as a young, impressionable graduate student, to really make a difference in people's lives, because some of the things that I saw really needed to change. And a lot of them have in the last 30 years, but we got a lot more to do yet.
Interesting. Well, we'll touch on some of those developments here in a minute, and certainly with your extensive experience in this field, very curious to get to some of your thoughts on it. I touched on it briefly just a moment ago, but elaborate, if you would, on the growth anticipated in the 65 and older population, what you see happening there.
Well, it's starting to hit the popular media now, so people shouldn't be too surprised when they hear terms like the aging tsunami or the graying of America.
That's right.
But kind of an interesting niche stat that I share with folks when I have the opportunity to do so is that the way we have provided long-term care services here in America for the past 40 years is really not a sustainable model with the number of people that we're expecting to turn advanced ages in the coming 20 years. In fact, about 5% of the people age 65 or over spent the night last night in an institution of any kind.
Wow.
Which surprises a lot of younger people. When I ask that question to high school or even college-age people, they typically guess, oh, probably half. But it's actually 5%. Well, that means 95% aren't.
Right.
But if you took that same 5% and applied it to the people that we know are going to turn 65 in the next 15, 20 years, I'll quote my friend Ron Crouch from the university, we know that they're coming because they've already been born. That would translate into us having to build somewhere in America a new 100-bed skilled nursing facility every week.
Wow.
Between now and the end of 2019.
Wow.
And, of course, that's not happening, and it's probably a good thing that it's not happening because it's going to force us to get a little more creative about how do we manage the needs of folks as they change and get into very advanced years.
Wow. So the population would demand 100-bed skilled nursing facility being built every single week for the next until 2019.
That's right.
Which is not going to happen, more than likely, right?
Well, there's not money in the system to really sustain that, and there's all kinds of barriers to making that happen right now that are trying to restrict the growth of cost of health care.
Right.
So we got to find out new ways to manage things.
That's right. And so with that in mind, what are you seeing in terms of changes in the current options that are available for folks, particularly with care models? What's on the horizon there as far as you can see?
Well, you know, with people living healthier longer, the time that they would require a lot of support may actually diminish some. But the multiple chronicities, by chronicities I mean chronic conditions that stack on one another as a person gets much older, make it a little more complex than when you just show up to get sutures on a cut in the ER. So I think that, combined with the boomer generation having higher expectations of what they're going to expect from healthcare in general, but long-term care in particular, the diversity shifts in our demographics, the advent of technologies that can help us manage people in their homes safely a lot longer, all in a period of diminishing resources, just like the conversation going on right now in Washington. How do you do more with less? There's a couple things that really stand out from a care model standpoint. We can't cover them all in the time we have this morning, but I'll just pick a couple that I think are really very promising. One of those is a care model called the greenhouse, which is an unfortunate label because I always have to explain that it has nothing to do with flowers. Well, it has a little bit to do with flowers, but the greenhouse model, that whole movement, has two really important underlying premises. One is to move away from the large-scale institutional medical model that we've used largely in long-term care for the past 50 years and toward a more residential scale and feel model. A lot of the good stuff that we've learned from what works with group home living for adults with mental retardation and developmental disabilities, but for skilled nursing care. And so if you could imagine this, a traditional nursing home that anyone's ever visited, even if they're just singing in the church choir at Christmas time, with the double-loaded corridors and 50 people on a wing and everybody in semi-private rooms, very medical model.
Yeah, much like a hospital.
Yeah, much like a hospital, because it's patterned after a hospital. Moving away from that, and imagine if that was a sheet cake, and you cut it in 4 equal pieces, and now and pulled them apart, and now have 4 12-person homes on a cul-de-sac. That's what they're doing with the greenhouse model. And that nurse that used to go up and down the hallway pushing a medication cart is now the Avon lady going home to home to home. And the design inside it is equally brilliant. It's all private rooms with their own bath that surround a great room in the center with an open country kitchen. And this model has 2 components. One's the design I just described, and the other is a total rethinking of the work distribution in healthcare in general, but also since we're talking about long-term care, it's very siloed. There's departments, and there's a nursing department and a housekeeping department and a dining services department. And everybody takes a piece of you. Right. And if it all blends well, then good things happen. But there's a lot left open to chance still. In this model, aside from the design issue, is everyone is cross-trained to do every job. It's like a utility infielder in baseball. And so they start with a certified nursing assistant and layer on top of that some culinary training, significant culinary training, hazardous chemicals handling, and a whole variety of other things. And now everybody who works in there except the nurse is a surrogate son or daughter. And so it's a more satisfying and rewarding place to work. And we have an industry that has a horrific track record for employee turnover. Last year, America's nursing homes turned over its caregiving staff 83%. Wow. And in the places that have implemented this greenhouse model I'm telling you about, it's single digits. Wow. It's remarkable different. And so that translates into greater continuity of care, better relationships, much higher satisfaction rates for the residents and their families. Right. And then the thing that really is tough to deny is the clinical outcomes that the greenhouses are producing are extraordinary. And so you can't just say it's a novelty. All the things that we measure to try to gauge quality care improve dramatically in this model. Falls that result in injury, infection rates, hospitalization rates, use of psychotropic drugs for behavior management, they all improve by double digits. And then you layer on top of this employment stability. It's just a better model. And I've visited several of them. Been very impressed by speaking with residents and their families and the staff members there. And anybody who's ever darkened the door of a traditional nursing home and now has this wouldn't dream of going back to that. And so the greenhouse is still it's a movement that's gotten some attachment by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to try to replicate it in all 50 states. Our organization is trying to work with the state to try to develop one near Lexington in Midway, Kentucky. And, of course, all the rules that were written governing licensed nursing home care were written before anybody came up with this idea.
Right. Now, Keith, what is it about the design of the facility, if you will, that leads to better outcomes, better clinical outcomes?
Well, I think it has a more family feel to it. The scale isn't as not as much crossfire. The intimacy that you develop with a small group of 11 other elders and the relationship with the staff is all promoted by this closeness. You know, they're big homes, and they're typically 6,000, 7,000 square foot homes which is bigger than you and I would probably live in, but it has a feel of being at someone's home. And so life happens in the center core instead of in a typical nursing home. What you have is people emerge from their bedroom for meals and retreat to their room. And they come out for an activity and they retreat to their room. And that doesn't happen in this model nearly as much.
Sounds like there's an intentional community.
That's exactly right. In fact, that's one of the terms they use to describe this as an intentional.
Gotcha. Interesting. So that's the greenhouse model. My guest in the studio is Dr. Keith Knapp, President and CEO of Christian Care Communities, Louisville's largest faith-based provider of affordable senior housing and long-term care services. We're talking about the latest trends in senior care. We'll take a quick break and be right back with Keith. After these messages, you're listening to Aging with Options on 970 WG.